never wash my feet. Jesus answered him, If you do not wash, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. Jesus said to him, He who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, You are not all clean.
So Peter, we can count on Peter here to give us a bold answer, whatever it is. And so Peter's bold assertion here, as Jesus begins to do this, is no way. No, this is not appropriate. It's not appropriate for the one who is our rabbi and teacher, who we believe to be the Messiah, to wash our feet. And so we're not going to have that. And Jesus says, yes, it is appropriate. And this reminds me of some other statements that Jesus makes. For instance, when he was baptized, remember John's objection? And what was Jesus' response? Allow it to be so, to fulfill all righteousness. And so there are things that Jesus did for the purpose of example that were not necessary in some ways, that were out of place. Peter recognizes, just like John recognized, wait a minute. John said, I need to be baptized of you. And Jesus said, no, allow it to be so. Peter is recognizing, no, you shouldn't be the one washing feet. I should be the one. Or, well, Peter didn't say that, did he? But he recognized that Jesus shouldn't be. And then Jesus responds back and he says, listen, if you don't allow this, then you don't have any part of me. It's necessary for me to do this. And then what's Peter's response to that? Yeah, well then here, wash my head and my feet and my hands as well. And so Peter, I love Peter for his boldness and things. Sometimes he's rash in what he says, and so he speaks up, strongly about, you're never going to wash my feet. And then it's like, oh, well, okay, if that's necessary, then here, I'm all in on this. And Jesus just makes the point, no, that's not necessary either. Because what is Jesus's concern here about physical hygiene? What's his concern? What is going on here? Serving, humbling yourself to serve. And so that point could be made without having to wash Peter's head and hands as well. And so Jesus is making the point, this is the role what a servant does. And so here's what I'm doing. And so that's the point of that. But then he drops this little hint in there. He drops this little nugget of information. Now, who's here? Whose feet is Jesus washing? The 12, which includes Judas. And Jesus knows exactly what Judas is going to do. And so there's this hint in here that you're clean, but not all of you are clean. And so he's talking about your association with me and allowing me to serve you, which is, by the way, what the Christ does, is what allows you to be clean. But not all of you is clean. Even though I'm washing all of your feet, not all of you are clean. And I'm sure the disciples are like, whoa, what's that about? There's going to be more of that as we get into this discussion. You got anything you want to add to that? Anybody else have anything? All right, so everybody's thinking about this and wondering what this is about. Verse 12, when he had washed their feet and had taken his garment, he sat down again, and he said to them, do you know what I've done to you? I want to make sure that you've gotten this point. I want you to think about this and to make sure that you've got it. You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, happy are you if you do them. And so he said, this is an object lesson. And so I want to make sure that you understand this and that you get this. And so what I've done for you is I have served you. Now, there have been some that have looked at this, and I get it. I really do get it, and I don't want to be disrespectful. I kind of want to show what I think Jesus is really saying here. I don't think Jesus is ordaining a ceremony to go through. I don't think he's instituting a memorial here. The Lord's Supper, I think that he is. We're about to look at that in a moment, and I think he is instituting a memorial in that. But I don't think the foot washing, when he says, if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I've given you an example. You should do as I've done. There are a number of groups that take that and say, well, just as he instituted the Lord's Supper as a memorial of his death, this is to be a memorial that Christians practice of service to one another. And my mom attends a congregation where I think a couple of times a year they will have a foot washing, and it's based upon this passage in that. And I don't think that it's wrong to have a foot washing necessarily, but I don't think that that's what Jesus is instructing here as far as the act. And so this comes into one of those areas that we have to discern what is the real point that Jesus is commanding here. He is commanding something. He is commanding them to do something. Is it the act of foot washing, or is it what foot washing symbolizes? You see the difference in that? So sometimes we can look at something and we can say, all right, well, he's just saying that we need to serve one another. And then others would say, no. We've got to wash each other's feet. And so that's the difference in thinking on this. What is it do you think about this that would sway you one way or the other in what Jesus is instructing? Yes.
That's not how you become great. And if I'm doing this to you, what should you do for each other?
Yes, I think that that's right. So the context of what the real problem was helps us to understand what he's really commanding. He's commanding a solution to the real problem. And the real problem was they're all thinking they're too important, above each other. And so they would never humble themselves to an act of service. One reason why I think that is significant is because if I were to wash your feet today, what would you think about it? That I was a humble servant, or that it was just weird? Yeah, I mean, it's weird, isn't it? Because we don't do that. That's not how we necessarily serve one another, because we don't live in that time where we're walking around in sandals on gravel roads. And so that wouldn't exactly meet the need of what's under consideration here. Something else that somebody pointed out to me in verse 15, I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. And somebody said, he doesn't say what I have done to you. So what as I have done to you is I have humbled myself to serve you in whatever the need was. The need was on this occasion to wash feet because nobody had been willing to do that. But it wasn't limited to that. It was this idea of refuting their proud, arrogant, I'm better than you mentality.
He's made the point many times before that he did not come to be served, but he came to serve. He's made that point before.
That's right. Colby, did you turn on the air earlier?
Earlier I did.
Okay. That's what it is. Well, I may have messed you up. I turned on the heat, and yeah. Okay. Well, I turned it. I'll explain what's going on because I've been confused trying to figure out. I'm sorry. I've been a little distracted. I'm thinking, why is the air on? I came in and it was cold in here, so I turned on the air, but the heat, but I turned it down to 66. And then when I came back in, it was 68 in here, and I thought, well, that's too warm, and so I turned it down to like low. But I didn't realize Colby had switched it to air conditioning, and that's why. And then the air came on. I was like, I don't know what's going on here. All right. Yeah. Too many chefs in the kitchen. That's what is going on here. I'm sorry about that. I should have left it. We put the deacon of climate control in charge of that, and then I tried to step in. I'm sorry. All right. So, verse 17. Anybody have anything that you want to add through verse 17?
So verse 1.
Yes.
Go back, it says Jesus knows where he's going back to. So he knows he's God. He's going back to God. So humbleness is is not thinking yourself lower than somebody. Lowerness is putting other people first. It's not thinking low of yourself at all. And I think that's what he's been teaching all along, even with the Pharisees. And now he's just practicing what he's been preaching.
Yeah, very good. And he says, if I then, your Lord and teacher, he knows who he is in that. Very good. Gerald? Okay. All right. Well, so understanding this is one thing, but what does Jesus say the blessing? Where's the blessing? In doing it. In doing it. So I think that this is the challenge. I think we can look at the scripture, and we may not have the mentality of saying, well, I'm better than you and jockeying for some position in that. We may understand the concept of humility, but it's not enough to understand the concept. We got to practice it. And that's really important. We talked about, we're going to talk about Matthew chapter 25, where he talks about, I was in prison, you did not visit me. I was hungry, and you did not give me food. All of those things, that was that opportunity to practice serving and each other, and so you got to put it into practice.
But we can get so focused on knowing the scriptures, which is what we need to know, and memorizing Bible verses and knowing the map. And I'm not trying to criticize any of that, but if we leave out serving others, like when we read that the other day, that really hit me.
Yeah.
And that takes time. It's humility for sure, but it takes time. And sometimes I think we overbook our lives and then when there's an opportunity to serve, we're like, I can't. I've just got too much, on my plate. Which I know there are times in our life that's legit,
Right.
But it's all the time, then
Yes.
not good.
That's right. And you've got to be, somebody here needed to be thoughtful about, there are feet that need to be washed. And that's another thing. It takes time to think about and consider what do others need? What would be useful in service to others? And very good point. All right, let's jump back over to Luke's account because there's a detail here. We mentioned this earlier, but if you look in Luke 22, verse 25 or 24, we mentioned this. There was a rivalry among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest. And then I think John 13, 1 through 17 fits in between verse 24 and 25 because he comes back after the foot washing, now giving the illustration of it. Now here's what he says. He says to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. But not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. For who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as one who serves. But you are those who have continued with me in my trials, and I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on the thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So he comes full circle to their concern here. Their concern is, what's my position in the kingdom? The problem is their serve. And so that's the point he's making. If I'm your Lord and I'm serving you, then you are to follow my example. And yes, you are going to sit at my table in the kingdom. You are going to judge the 12 tribes of Israel. You are going to have a position of importance in my kingdom. But it won't be because you are the benefactor and everybody's serving you. It'll be because you are servants. Think about the rest of the time of the apostles on earth. Were they great, important men that had luxury dumped upon them and people waiting on their every need? And no, quite the opposite. They gave their lives in service to others. And they are great in the kingdom. When Jesus would talk about his kingdom, he would talk about it's built upon the foundation of the apostles. But that's because they were servants, like their Lord, the chief cornerstone. Any thoughts, comments?
Do you think, so we still see this even toward the end of his life, but after he died and he was raised, do we see anything like this?
Do we see Jesus serving? No.
Do we
What?
see the apostles fussing about his
No.
death?
Yeah. Okay. I understand what you're saying. Yes. So the question is, after his resurrection, do we see the apostles fighting and squabbling over who's important? Because this is not the first time that they've done this. They've done this several times before, and I don't think we do. I think that initially we do still see some confusion about the nature of the kingdom. That maybe they're thinking it's a physical kingdom that is going to come. But I think that that's cleared up very quickly after the Holy Spirit comes upon them. And then I don't think we see that type of behavior anymore. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 When they realized, very good point. Yes.
Hey, Elani, there's a reward in serving that you can't put even a name on it. You can't, put it in foot washing or washing someone's hair. Or I think on some things that go into everything bad stuff. There's a feeling you should get that you can't put a video of that.
Yeah.
And then you realize at that moment, everything else just melts away.
Yeah.
And then you realize what's really important. Usually serving other people.
So there's this interest, the Bible is filled with these principles that seem contradictory initially, but in other words, I don't see how that makes sense. It's more blessed to give than to receive. And it's like, how does that work? But that's a principle. That's a principle of life. That's a principle of wisdom that God has set up. That's how life really works. And it's almost a secret that people don't get. And I've heard some explain it and say, well, it's more blessed to give than to receive because at least you have something to the person who you're giving to. They don't have anything. You have something, so you're in a more blessed position. I think that's part of it. I think that could be part of it. But I think the real blessing in it is the service that you're offering and the character that is developed that's more closely conformed to the image of God when you serve. And so you're talking about that kind of intrinsic blessing and reward, feeling joy that comes with that. Yeah, how do you explain that? I gave up my time and I gave up my possession, and I those were the things that I thought were important to me, and yet I feel better now than I did when I had them. And so how do you explain that? And I think what God is saying is, look, this is the way it really works. And so when we walk by faith and not by sight, what we're doing is we're going through life and we're trusting God on those principles, saying, well, that doesn't make sense how I think it should work necessarily, but I trust you on that. And life works out well that way. Good point.
I read a quote today that goes along with what she said. It said, there is no peace as long as one thinks only of himself. So that peaceful feeling.
Yes.
Healthy.
Right.
Serving.
That's right. Very good. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm supposed to know this, and I don't. What does it mean that the apostles are going to be judging the 12 tribes of Israel? Okay.
Well, this is so simple that I'm going to get Dwight to answer it. So, do you have a good explanation before I give my poor explanation? Somebody give a better explanation when I get done with this. But so you have here you have this statement about them judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You also have statements about us judging angels, and both of those are like, we're not given a lot of details of how that works, and it may simply be, like I said, this doesn't completely satisfy me, but it may be the idea that here we are submitting to the Lord and following the Lord, and in that our conduct is set up next to in comparison, or the apostles in this case, are set up in comparison with the 12 tribes of Israel. And how do the 12 tribes of Israel, how are they doing in their following the Lord, in having this mentality of sitting, are they going to sit at the table in the kingdom? No. I mean, we've just gone through all of these chapters where Jesus is saying, the sons of the kingdom will be cast out and others will be brought in. And so what reason would we give for the 12 tribes of Israel not being in the kingdom? What reason would you give? They didn't follow God. What did the apostles do? They followed God. And so is it possible to do it? Absolutely. These 12 did it. But these 12 tribes didn't. How are we going to judge angels? Well, here are angels that were in the very presence of God, free from all of the things that we have to deal with on this earth. And what did some of them do? They rebelled. And then here are humans in the midst of this world of temptation who have chosen to be faithful and loyal. And so in that case, maybe by that we judge. I'm not completely, that's the best explanation that I have. There may be a lot more to it and I may be totally missing it, but that's one explanation that at least makes some sense to me. It's in the Bible. Somebody Google that. It's in the New Testament somewhere. Do you not even know that you will judge angels? And so, as the good book says, 1 Corinthians 6:3. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Anything else?
So there will be a position. Position.
Yeah, and so I don't know. I don't know that the judging is I'm in a position to pronounce a sentence upon you. I think the judging may simply be that by our example, it shows the condemnation of them. Yeah, the contrast.
Ever been in a situation where sometimes people, a person, not an angel, or may get aggravated at you because you did the right thing, or you made a different choice and you chose this path, and by you doing the right thing, it makes them recognize their guilt.
That's right.
Condemned,
Yeah.
even though you're not doing that thing at all. It's similar to that.
Maybe, because we even experience that some, that somebody does right and we feel judged. What did Cain feel towards Abel? Why did he feel that? And so, right. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. I think that's maybe in the same vein of thinking there. All right, let's turn back over to John 13 now. And we'll pick back up in that conversation where Jesus has been washing their feet and now explaining to them that they need to be servants. Dwight, would you like to read verse 18, John 13, verse 18 through 22?
I do not speak concerning all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats bread with me has lifted up his heel against me. Now I tell you before it comes, that when it does come to pass, you may believe that I am he. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who receives whomever I send receives me, and he who receives me receives him who sent me. When Jesus had said these things, he was troubled in spirit and testified and said, Most assuredly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. Then the disciples looked at one another, perplexed about whom he spoke.
So he dropped this little hint earlier about you're not all clean. And now he comes back and he's more direct in saying, here's what I mean by that. One of you will betray me. One of you will betray me. So we started off this chapter in verse 2, in verse 2, where it talks about that Judas would betray him. and Jesus is aware of what is about to happen. And so now he specifies exactly. And I think he's trying to prepare them for this. And they look at each other confused. Now, you remember he's told them earlier that he's going to be handed over to the Gentiles and they will abuse him and crucify him and he will rise the third day. And they were troubled by this. They were confused by this. But did they recognize it in any level that kept them from being shocked by it later? No. Here, again, it's almost like he's trying to prepare them. One of you are going to betray me. And they look at each other and one of us? I can't believe that. And when it happens, they still seem shocked by it. And so they're not internalizing this at any deep level. And I get it. I understand why. But Jesus is trying to tell them. I want you to think about the importance of this, though. Even though they don't understand it, later, when they think back on what Jesus says, what does that do for their confidence in Jesus? He told us. He told us. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And he tried to tell us that, and we were too dense to get it. And so their confidence is going to be built later on. And I think that's important too. You think about, you know how a child goes through the stage of, when they're real little, they think mom and dad know everything. And then they get to the point where they think mom and dad know nothing. And then usually later on in life, they start to think, mom and dad were pretty smart. Well, what was it that changed in that? So at the time when they don't think mom and dad know anything, mom and dad are trying to tell them things, and they're not accepting it. They're not grasping it. But then later, when they experience life a little bit more, they look back and they say, mom tried to tell me that. Dad tried to tell me that. And I think and that's the reason why they have more confidence in them later. And I think that's what Jesus is doing here. It's not that he's expecting them to get it at this time. I think he knows that they won't. But he's planting that seed so that later they'll look back and say, he did know what he was talking about. He did know what was going on there. Any thoughts through verse 22?
And in verse 18, he mentions the prophecy in Psalms 41 that David spoke about. Even though David was speaking about himself, the Holy Spirit was using that as a prophecy, and he's telling them that this is about to be fulfilled.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because in that psalm, David is crushed, and he's crushed because someone that he had confidence in, who he took in to be, at his table. He eats bread with me. He's lifted up his heel against me. He's betrayed me. Have you ever been betrayed by somebody that you had full confidence in, that you really trusted? It's a very devastating feeling, And then notice what it says in verse 21. When Jesus said these things, what? He was troubled in his spirit. I want you to lock into Jesus's emotions here on this, because he knows these things. And I think sometimes we think that because Jesus knows what's going to happen, that he's just kind of stoic to it. It's like, okay, it's this. But he wrestled with the same things that we would wrestle with. I think he wrestled with fear when he's in the garden praying. I think he's deeply distressed about this. I don't think he wants to go through the agony of it any more than he. You've probably had doctor's appointments before that you knew you needed to go to. You knew what they were going to do, but as it got closer, you just started having those feelings like, maybe we can just cancel this and everything will be okay. I don't really want to go through with this. And that's as close as I've ever had to what I think Jesus is experiencing here. But that very real emotion of knowing this is what needs to happen, but I dread it. I don't want to go through with this. Here we see one that I've taken in for the last 3 years, has been part of my family, that I've poured everything into, that we've entrusted with the purse, the collection here. And then I know what he's doing. And Jesus is brokenhearted over it. Any more comments on that section? All right, what we're trying to do, and I'm sure we're not doing it perfectly, but we're doing the best we can, is we're trying to take the 4 accounts and we're trying to kind of harmonize the way the conversation went from the details given in each of the 4 accounts. So let's flip back over to Matthew 26 now. And what's even more confusing about that is Matthew and Luke don't put everything in exactly the same order. So in Matthew 26, verse 21, he comes, and we're going to have to read one section and then go and look at another section that maybe some of it would sift in between it. But would you read 21 through 25?
Now, as they were eating, he said, "Surely I say to you, one of you will betray me." And they were exceedingly sorrowful, and each of them began to say to him, "Lord, is it I?" He answered and said, "He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it was written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been good for that man if he had not been born." Then Judas, who was betraying him, answered and said, "Rabbi, is it I?" And he said, "You have said it."
Okay, so we have this account here, and in Matthew's account, Matthew kind of summarizes it in a way where it sounds like Jesus is saying this to all of them. And so all of them ask, am I the one that's going to do it? Is it me? And Jesus says to all, "No, it's the one who dips his hand with me in the dish," and that's Judas. When we look over back in John's account, we see the same details there, but we see that maybe not everything was said to all 12 of them in that. But what I want you to notice from Matthew's account is he said that one of you will betray them, and which of them questioned, "Is it I?" What? All of them did. You notice in that? All of them said, "Is it I?" But then Judas does as well in this. And what does Jesus answer to Judas? Yeah, that's right. And so I think that there's this, Jesus makes it clear to Judas, "I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing." And we will see that later. The disciples don't get that insight. Now, there's one disciple that I think does. But I don't think this announcement was to everybody about Judas. And so we'll kind of look at this and then try to harmonize that with John's account. So let's flip back over to John's account now there. So verse 23 through 30, John 13, 23 through 30.
Now there was leaning on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples whom he loved. Simon Peter therefore motioned to him to ask who it was of whom he spoke. Then leaning back on Jesus' breast, he said to him, "Lord, is it I?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I shall give a piece of bread when I have dipped it." And having dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon. Now after the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Then Jesus said to him, "What you do, do quickly." But no one at the table knew for what reason he said this to him. For some thought because Judas had the money box that Jesus had said to him, "Buy these things we need for the feast. Buy those things we need for the feast," or that he should have give something to the poor. Having received the piece of bread, he then went out immediately, and it was night.
We've talked about before how the typical arrangement was for feasts and gatherings in homes, typical homes at that time. You didn't have a sit-down table where you had chairs that you'd pull up, but you'd have a little bit of elevated table, and everybody would sit at the table, actually kind of recline, lay at the table with their feet out. And so that would put everybody close together. And so the disciple whom Jesus loved in this depiction, next to Jesus here, would have been John, the one writing this. That seems to be the way that John refers to himself in the book, as the disciple whom Jesus loved. He was next to Jesus at the table. And apparently Judas was very close proximity there, arm's length away anyway. And so Peter is sitting somewhere else. I don't know which one of these is supposed to be Peter, but Peter looks at John and says, "Find out who it is." Jesus says, "Want to ask him." And so John just kind of leans over and says, "Who is it? You know, tell me who it is." And I think Jesus says to him, "It's the one that I give the piece of bread to." And then he dips the bread and he gives it to Judas. So I think John at this point knows, okay, because he's gotten that information. The rest of the disciples, I don't think, heard all of that conversation and knew that was going on. And so Jesus reveals to John, I know it's Judas, but I don't think the rest of them are clued in on that. Does that make sense? Are you seeing something else in there that would indicate otherwise? All right. Just trying to get a feel for how this is going. Yes. Yes. Yes, I think that's right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't, again, I don't know how close. I think that Peter was trying to get the information and John asked, but I don't know that, yeah, and maybe maybe John signals back. It's Judas. Um, now, verse 27. After the piece of bread, Satan entered him. Well, you remember earlier, if you look back in verse 2 of this same chapter, the supper being ended, or during the supper, many translations say, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon's son, to betray him. So Satan has been at work at Judas for some time. How do we know that? What do we already know about Judas that would indicate, yeah, he's been stealing money out of the treasury for some time? And then what's another event that's already come to pass? He went and said, "How much will you give me if I betray him?" So the deal's already been struck. So we know that Satan is at work at this. But what I think we see here is maybe how Satan works is he entered him. I don't think that was somehow that Judas was perfectly fine with this, and it's like, well, I'm here as one of the disciples, and all of a sudden he was just possessed to go out and do something. I think what it is Judas now sees, this is my moment. I know where he's going tonight. I'm going to go ahead and exit and go get the group together to go get him. And so that, I think that's the intention comes now, or he's moved to do that at this point.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. He was kind of at a crossroads, maybe conflicted up to this point, but now he's resolved.
Yeah.
See it through.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the arrangement already? They didn't want to do it in front of the people, so they
Right.
got him to say, "Okay, you figure out the right time for us to come."
Yes, that's right. And I think that he's moved now to say this is the right time. Yes, right. Mitchell?
I think one thing that, as the story unfolds, that we need to remember, when we think of Judas, we automatically think of Eve. But before this, Jesus had picked him to be one of his disciples, so he had to have good qualities. So I think that's a lesson for us, that just we think we got it going on, don't think that we can't be overtaken.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the reason why Jesus is so troubled at this and hurt at this, is because this could have gone very differently for Judas, and the Lord's plan would have had to work out some other way. But because of Judas's change, I think it's heartbreaking to Jesus, because Judas could have been just like any of the others as far as his loyalty.
And we see that after it's done, that it bothers him to the point he takes his life.
That's
He
right.
had to have a conscience.
Yes, that's right.
It's just a battle that we go through every day, and he just got over it.
That's exactly right.
Same thing can happen to us.
Very good. I like that. Okay, verse 27, I think this is interesting to me as well. Jesus is the one in control. And what I mean by that is it's on his timing that Satan is active. So now Judas acts upon it. Well, when did Jesus say this was going to happen? He knows. And so he's truly the one laying his life down at this. And I also think about the disciples at this point, that I don't know that anyone is suspecting Judas at this point. Nobody's raised any objection about him having the money box at this point. And so even when he gets up to go, what are they thinking? Yeah, right. Yeah, maybe the Lord's sending him on something, to go take care of some business for the Lord on that. And the two things that are mentioned there is perhaps give something to the poor or buy something that's needed for the feast. You know what was needed for this feast? A lamb. He was buying the lamb. He was. And for 30 pieces of silver and betraying him. And so he goes out, and it was night. So now we have the 11 disciples there. Judas is now left. It's significant to me that Judas was there when Jesus took on the role of a servant and washed his feet, knowing that he would betray him. He did so anyway. But now Jesus has opportunity with the 11 that will continue on the mission that Jesus has for them. And so we'll see the conversation change just a little bit. You've seen the conversation up to this point. You're clean, but not all of you. But now he's going to address those. I know you are the ones that will continue on with this. And so we'll pick up next time looking at some of that instruction to them as the ones that will carry on building their faith. Any final comments? We have 1 minute. Yeah.
What would I have said? I'm not gonna let you do it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. But Jesus says, go and do it. And I think about Judas too, hearing that. Jesus, it's obvious to Judas now, Jesus knows exactly what he's going to do. Go and do it. And Judas does it. So, all right, we'll pick up in verse 31 next time. Thank you for your good attention and great comments. Appreciate it. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact